How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Redzone's roster previews episode, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Chicago Bears. In each of these videos, I take a look at the team, I talk about every single player, and I project whether they will make an impact on this team, make the roster, whether they will make the practice squad, or be cut before the final 53. So, you can see all the previous episodes that I've already done in this top corner. And with that being said, we're going to jump right into talking about the Chicago Bears. And this is the first episode where I'm recording after preseason games have already occurred. So now we'll get a little bit better idea of both how players are doing, but also teams have started releasing their depth charts. They're unofficial, but it gives us a good idea of where the coaching staff and where the front office views these players after camp. So let's start talking about the Chicago Bears, and like the previous episodes, I'm going to first talk about the coaching, maybe the front office, the culture around the Chicago Bears, and I'm just going to say it up front, and this is what I believe here. I believe that the front office saved Matt Nagy's job this offseason. They had the power, Ryan Pace and everybody else in the front office had the power to fire Matt Nagy this offseason, next offseason, sometime soon. But I believe that they absolutely nailed the draft, and that's going to save Matt Nagy's job. I truly believe it. I don't think Matt Nagy is a good, he's fine. He's not a great coach. I feel like he's kind of, he's decent. I would say solid. There's definitely a ton of coaches that are worse than Matt Nagy, but there's also a lot better. So he's right there. But I truly think that the management saved his job by picking Justin Fields, by taking Tevin Jenkins, and taking other great picks like Khalil Herbert. Those were three of my favorite picks in the entire draft, and they absolutely nailed it. So I truly believe that Matt Nagy may be around for a few more years because of what the front office was able to do in this draft. So let's now start talking about the players, starting with the quarterback position. Probably not the first team we've gone through. Now that I think about it, it might really be that we actually have a pretty strong QB competition. And it's very interesting here. It's clear that at the moment Dalton has the first team reps. The Bears bring in Andy Dalton this offseason. There was a lot of speculation. Are they going to trade for somebody? Are they going to sign somebody huge in free agency? And they end up getting Andy Dalton, which was, I think, just kind of a fine signing. It's okay. His upside is not great, but he's, I feel like, a fine starter for a few games, for a little bit, and it's a great situation here where he can be the mentor. But being straight up, Justin Fields is the better player, and he will be for the next 10, 15 years. One of the best picks in the entire draft. The second he fell past 8, I was thinking, somebody either go trade up for him, or whoever's going to get him is getting an absolute steal in Justin Fields. Unbelievable player. I had him ranked third in the quarterbacks this draft, behind Trevor Lawrence and behind Zach Wilson, but it was so close with him and Wilson. And I don't know why Fields started slipping all the way down and down the boards. He almost, was closer to Mac Jones than he was to Trey Lance, and I had Fields above Trey Lance. So I think that now it may have fit better in the system perhaps for the Niners, but I truly think all the teams that chose not only quarterbacks but other positions in front of Justin Fields in a matter of even probably 3 years will start to regret it. So he played in the preseason game, and he looked solid out there, I would say. He did look very comfortable. He made a really good throw for a touchdown. He looked very mobile, very quick. There was a quote from him after the game saying it felt slow. And honestly, watching him, he did look slower in the fact mentally. The game, he said, was slower than he thought it would be, and I kind of would agree just watching him play. He did not look slow in a bad fashion. He looked calm. He looked like he was processing. To me, it looked like he was taking it almost half, 3/4 speed. on almost everything, and that's fine if he played that well. I just felt like I watched, 6 games or so this offseason for the draft on him, perhaps more, and I could tell the difference. He didn't look like he was even putting 100% effort, and he was still lighting it up. So he performed very, very well this week in the preseason, and I do think now people are really going for the he should start right away. If it was me, I probably would. I do think he's a superior player, not only for this future, but this season. Not only halfway through the season, I think right now Justin Fields is a better quarterback than Andy Dalton is. But I think what's going to happen is Andy Dalton will end up starting at least a game. I mean, I think they start with some tough games, which I'll talk about later. They start with a tough schedule, so it's maybe not even in the benefit of Andy Dalton if he gets to start right away, because he has to play some tough defenses. So I could see the changing of the guard very quickly here, going to Justin Fields. So that's what I would personally be doing. I think he is the more superior player. He has a pretty good arm, extremely mobile. I think there's going to be so many plays that he can make that Trubisky wasn't able to make. And his accuracy is good, and he's very patient, where he's not going to force anything. I think his worst game maybe was the Indiana game from last year, and it wasn't even terrible compared to some of the other ones that other quarterbacks had. So I truly think it was one of the best picks in the draft, and I think that they're going to absolutely love Justin Fields. And this year, I think he gets in pretty early. They also have Nick Foles, who I was not shocked they haven't traded already, but maybe I was surprised. Maybe it turns out maybe this Colts Carson Wentz injury might not be as bad. I mean, seems like he's been out there at least in practice, not actually practicing, but just on the field. It seems like he's not at home resting or anything. They said 5 to 12 weeks. That was probably a little over a week or two ago. And that could progress. I was maybe thinking that the Bears should ship Foles to somewhere else for even like a 6th round pick. But at the same time, they could probably push it up to like a 4th or something if a team was desperate for a quarterback. So I do think that they should trade Nick Foles, because it's clear he's with the third strings. He's not going to be anything above. Even if Fields takes the job, Dalton's going to be your backup. So I don't really understand any point of keeping Nick Foles. So if a team comes calling and they're desperate for a QB injury happens, I think you need to do that. So this QB room is, obviously a competition, but I think it's Justin Fields should be the guy very quickly, and I think he will blossom into a top 15 within the first few years of his career, but probably a top 10 quarterback in not that long. I truly think that this year there were 3 or 4 quarterbacks that I do think within a number of years could be top 10 caliber overall. So I like the QB room. It's competition. As long as they go with Fields, eventually this room will be elite. Now moving on to the running backs, we have David Montgomery, who started to break out onto the scene last season, kind of a 10 to 15 ranked running back, I would say, about. So he's not elite, but he is finally starting to develop. We knew he had something coming out of Iowa State. And he's a pretty solid back overall, has some ability to move, and has a decent amount of power as well. And so I think it was smart for them to bring in a receiving back like Damian Williams, who can actually catch outside the backfield. And I think that was a pretty good signing. It does kind of seem like Tariq Cohen could be coming out of the mix here. But Montgomery, going back to him, I think is a solid running back that you feel good with him. And then to have your other players that I'll talk about be balancing that, I think that works well. David Montgomery, I expect a breakout season even farther than last year this season. So Damian Williams, as I mentioned, he can be a receiving back. They signed him from Kansas City. He opted out of last season, and I think it was a good pickup overall. I was actually surprised they decided to go with that, but Tariq Cohen, I think, is still on the PUP list. He for sure is not on the active roster at the moment. So if he comes back, that could potentially be interesting. But I think right now Damian Williams will take advantage of the preseason reps and perhaps take that backup spot from Tariq Cohen. And Tariq Cohen, though, will still be on this roster. He's extremely quick. He is smaller in frame, but can also be a receiving back if needed. But it does seem like potentially he could be on his way out with just now Damian Williams, who they bring in. And then they also draft Khalil Herbert, who I would say performed pretty well in the preseason game. I love that pick for the value they got. And his speed is going to be his strength. I think they've already tried him out at returner a bit as well. So, not maybe as quick as Tariq Cohen, but similar role, perhaps, eventually for Khalil Herbert. So, I absolutely love that pick, and I think he could eventually, honestly, weed out Tariq Cohen. They also have a few interesting players behind that. Going into the practice squad here, Ryan Nall, who is not spectacular at anything. He's kind of just average at everything, kind of on the slower side, but he always seems to perform relatively well in the preseason. He did get an opportunity last year. I think it was against the Vikings where everybody was picking up Ryan Nall for fantasy. He didn't do anything, so he hasn't done a whole lot when he's on the active roster, and I do think truly the four above him are much better, but I do think that he can still be a practice squad piece. And honestly, you can make the case Artavis Pierce is above Ryan Nall right now. He had an absolutely outstanding game this weekend. So that was a great performance by him, perhaps proving a spot why he should be on the practice squad. Probably not the roster, but potentially could take over Ryan Nall in the depth charts and then have them cutting CJ Marable. I think the depth on this running back room is very, very good. I have confidence in Montgomery making another breakout season. And then just so many good players, honestly, going down the list. I would take any of those three below Montgomery to be like a top 2 or 3 back on any team, really, that is needing a running back. So I think this is an absolutely solid running back room. The wide receiver room is interesting. They recently shipped off Anthony Miller to Houston, so they lose that there. But honestly, it's a loss, but he hasn't been outstanding for them. And they have some other pieces. You're looking for a big step up from a few players. So let's start with Allen Robinson, who they gave the franchise tag this offseason. I don't think he's going to stay around in Chicago, honestly, past this season if they're not able to get a deal done. But he's absolutely a stud receiver and a top 10 fantasy guy, I would say, for sure. Borderline-ish, like within that 10 to 15 range, and that's probably about where he's for actual receiver rankings as well. He's very, very solid, does everything for you. He can go deep, go medium. I feel like he's been underappreciated for the last few years, especially since going to the Bears. Really, I feel like he hasn't had the right quarterback situation, and perhaps Justin Fields can turn that around for him. So I do think Allen Robinson, elite receiver as a number 1. They just maybe want to get that contract done. Otherwise, you might want to let him walk, I guess, if it gets too steep a price. But I would try to keep him around at all costs. But they need this breakout from Darnell Mooney, who performed very well last year for a late-round pick. And I do think he takes a step up this year. His stock went up when Anthony Miller was traded out. But his deep speed is great. I think that he will have a huge breakout year and be a key to unlocking this offense overall. So I have absolute confidence in him taking a huge step up. And I think he's blossoming into a solid number 2 receiver. They also bring in Marquise Goodwin, who has had a pretty interesting, story over the past while. That he was supposedly, I believe, traded to the Eagles last offseason. But then he opted out, and I can't remember whether the trade was canceled because he opted out or because of something else. But the trade basically canceled. But he was originally going to go to the Eagles, but he opts out of the season, so he didn't play at all last year. Then, once San Francisco gets him back, they just release him, and he ends up going to the Chicago Bears. And he is definitely going to be your deep speed player. They have that in Mooney, but they also have that in a few other players on this list. And he could be an X factor for this team. We haven't seen him play in a bit. He's never been an elite route runner or receiver. It's more so been about his speed. So perhaps that's what you need in this offense. Maybe could be a secret weapon, potentially. We'll have to kind of see there. They also have Damiere Byrd, who they bring in. He's bounced around a lot, but he actually performed relatively well for the Patriots last year and kind of came in here to compete for that number 3 spot. I do think he has a decent shot, if Goodwin is not working out, to be involved in this offense. He's a smaller guy, also pretty speedy. He potentially could get in the mix here. And I would say those are the only locks. I would feel like to for sure make the team. I also think Riley Ridley is pretty much a lock. He's just not been given opportunities since coming out of Georgia, but I feel like he was very underrated that draft. Got picked later than I expected, and now he has, a little bit of familiarity with Justin Fields. So I think that he could be in. I would feel comfortable, honestly, just giving him a shot at wide receiver 3 or 4, but he might end up being wide receiver 5 or so for this team. So that is something to watch out for. He could take a big step up, I feel like, if given the opportunity. The absolute wild card in this receiver room, and the one roster spot I'm honestly questioning here, is Javon Wims. I'm kind of going to talk about him here, even though I just don't know where he's going to end up. He's so interesting because he's been hot and cold for this team. I'm even like right now, at this very moment, I have him listed on the roster. I'm debating right now, like switching with another player. He just is so hot and cold. So, like, I remember his rookie preseason, 6th round pick or so. He performs outstanding. And, we're looking at, I was in a deep fantasy league. It was like, maybe this guy is worth a pickup. And he's made some good plays for this team. He also has had some terrible drops. He did not perform well this week. And he also, everyone remembers that play in the playoffs this past year. I mean, he has been absolutely hot and cold. So I can completely understand him being cut. And I think one more bad week and he can be gone right away. For sure, I would rather keep Daz Newsome, who they took out of North Carolina in the later rounds. He's going to be a nice jump ball threat, which is really what they don't have on the rest of this receiving room, maybe besides Allen Robinson. So I feel great with that there. Javon Wims is just, will he make it or not? And I'm starting to lean not, but I'm giving him one last chance here. But if he does not perform well this week, switch him with a player I'll talk about later who I have on the practice squad. Kind of flip those two. I've been debating all week who to put as the practice squad receivers. I originally had Jon'Vea Johnson, but then I took a look at their depth chart. I started making the projections before the preseason game, but Rodney Adams played absolutely outstanding, had a great catch from Justin Fields. He was a guy I thought maybe would just be cut right away, but they've started weeding out some other receivers, which is good for him. They just this week cut both Jester Weah and Justin Hardy. They just cut today, the day I'm recording this. So Rodney Adams has a good shot. He only has 2. He's in his second year of experience, so he is an easy practice squad spot. Might as well keep him around. So interesting, his career arc as well. Started with the Vikings, ended up with the Colts. Then I actually think he took some time off to try to become a YouTuber. And I don't think it actually worked out for him, potentially. But he gave it a shot. The other guy to watch out for on this practice squad is Chris Lacey, who has not been around the league as long as I feel like he has. I feel like he's been on so many teams, but he actually is a pretty easy one to put on the practice squad. So watch out for him as well. They have him listed above Jon'Vea Johnson on the practice squad, on the depth chart, and so that's why I didn't put Jon'Vea Johnson on the practice squad. I originally had him there, but then after the game and after looking at the depth chart, I'm putting Rodney Adams there, and I think Thomas Ives is cut. So this is a solid receiver room. It's filled with depth. They're just throwing darts at the board, but just watch out for some sleepers here. Darnell Mooney taking a big step up. Robinson's absolutely solid lock. Goodwin or Byrd could be a secret weapon, and Ridley, I just think, could truly take a huge step up this year. So I absolutely love that receiver room. Then we have the tight end room, where They just took Cole Kmet last year in the second round, and I think it was a decent choice. He was probably the best tight end in last year's draft. I was shocked the Bears of all teams took him, given they had Jimmy Graham in some other I feel like they could have gotten some other positions, but he's a solid tight end, and I think this year he takes over the mantle from Jimmy Graham as the tight end one. I feel just Jimmy Graham doesn't offer quite as much as he used to, especially at this point in his career. But Cole Kmet is a solid all-around player, and I think he will be a good target for Justin Fields in this offense. He's decent at blocking as well. They also have, Jimmy Graham, of course, not, like I said, what he used to be. I feel like he just can be a red zone threat at this point in his career. Love them bringing in Jesse James, though. That was one of my favorite signings within the last few weeks. And then, of course, he catches a touchdown and played pretty well in the preseason game. I think he's proven himself to be a roster-level player still and can be that third tight end on this roster. So I feel really good in that right there. I mean, Jesse James could be a backup tight end on almost any other team, I feel like. So solid for him to be a tight end 3. Great depth there. I've been keeping Jesper Horsted on the practice squad. Has played okay when given opportunities, I guess. They have J.P. Holtz, I believe, listed above him, but I'm not a huge J.P. Holtz guy. And then Scooter Harrington, I just have him cutting. So this is a solid tight end room overall. It's really good with the depth here, having 3 really, really good tight ends. And I think that will be solid for them to have going into the season. As for rookie quarterbacks, tight ends can definitely be important options. Now let's talk about this offensive line. This line is actually pretty good with depth, but its starters and its rotation is just not, it's not great. Like they have, and I've been thinking about this so much, where you think about in almost every position, the team who has like the weakest at a position normally has the best backup, but 2 does not equal 1, like 95% of the time. So, I mean, we've also had some news this week for this position, and so I'm very interested to see where they go with this. Let's start with the locks. And honestly, it's not even locks. I've seen so many configurations you could go with here. I don't even know where to start talking about this line, because I'm just going to pick players, say where they've played and where they could play, because you could do so many combinations. That's the good news about this line, is they're all pretty flexible, but at the same time, I don't know where to project it. So I kind of just put, the best 9, potentially 10 guys, depending on, I'll talk about in a bit, just best players, because you can kind of move these guys around. Because Cody Whitehair is probably the best player on this line. He's been around the longest, which is crazy to say. I still have like a rookie signed card of him. It feels like he's not been in the league that long, but it's getting up there now. He is versatile. I think the best combination for this line would be to play him at center. He can play guard. It just becomes a question of, I believe they played James Daniels at right guard last year and Cody Whitehair at left guard. And then they played like Sam Mustipher at center, I think the combo was. Or perhaps it was Daniels at left, and then when Whitehair might have been hurt last year, now I think about. But there's so many things to remember about who played where. Because he can play center and guard. You've also got James Daniels, who can play center and guard. But more specifically, I think I believe he played right guard last year, and so they might move him to left. James Daniels is a power player. It just depends here. If we go off the interior, you could go potentially James Daniels at the left guard, Cody Whitehair at the right, and then maybe put Sam Mustipher at center. Could be a combination. You could also go Cody Whitehair at center, Daniels at guard, and then either Jermaine Ifedi or Elijah Wilkinson or something like that. You could go with that as well. There's just so many combinations here to go with. But those are the 2 players I'm 100% confident will start in some capacity on this offensive line. Then it gets tricky. Let's first talk about Tevin Jenkins, who fell in the draft because of injury concerns. But this dude is an absolute stud. He was unbelievable at Oklahoma State, and I had him in like the top 15, 20 on my big board this year, and I was shocked teams took other tackles. The thing I am concerned about for Tevin here, though, is he has to move from right to left tackle. He played right tackle at Oklahoma State and was absolutely dominant. Now, I do think they could still do that. Everything shifted this week when they signed Jason Peters. Now, Jason Peters is not unbelievable anymore, but he is potentially a startable player. I mean, you can kind of tell in Philadelphia, Andre Dillard, who is not unbelievable, is a better player than Jason Peters. So Jason Peters is not an elite player anymore. But I could also see a combo where they go Jenkins at right tackle, keep him at that natural position, Jason Peters at left tackle. They could go with that. I just feel like Jason Peters is almost going to be closer to a coach in this roster, which is weird, but it's also going to be weird seeing him in not a Philadelphia uniform. That's weird as well. But so figuratively, you could switch that around too. Like I said, I'm just going to talk about the players individually and kind of figure it out. You have Jermaine Ifedi, who was a bust for the Seahawks. He's been not great here. He can play right guard or right tackle. I feel like now he could be on his way out. Like I said, another combo, you could go Peters, Jenkins, and then put Elijah Wilkinson, who they bring in, who is not, in my opinion, a great startable tackle, but that might be what they have to go with. But you might feel more comfortable going with Jason Peters left tackle, Tevin Jenkins right tackle, Elijah Wilkinson guard. So there's just so many combinations here, and it's really this tackle in the right guard spot, and same with the left tackle that are just mixed match. As I said, Jason Peters, I think he makes the roster, could even start, but he is a shell of himself at this point. Alex Bars is really all they have as a pure guard backup that I feel confident in. I just don't think I've seen enough from Arlington Hambright, so I'm going with him to be a depth piece on the line. Sam Mustipher has some, I think, decent amount of experience now. I think that he is a backup center, and then they have one guy that's like, okay, if a center goes down, we need to plug him in. Let's just do that. So those are, I'm pretty sure. Then it's this next tackle spot, because you need to keep Larry Borum in some capacity. You spent pretty high draft capital on him this year, and I believe it was the 5th round, and I think they keep him no matter what. Now, he could also play tackle and guard. So it's just so many combinations, and it's really going to take them in camp going through and preseason seeing what works the best, because you can put people all over. Because the guy I was debating of keeping instead of Javon Wims on his team is Latavius Simmons. They have him listed. I haven't looked at their depth chart since them signing Jason Peters. At least they didn't have him on their depth chart yet. But they had Latavius Simmons listed at backup right tackle. That's pretty high. For where I would have thought he would have been. So I'm going to keep him for sure on the practice squad borderline roster. If you want to keep him instead of Javon Wims, go ahead. Like I said, Arlington Hambright, they just took last year. Haven't seen enough. Dieter Iselin has been apparently doing good things at camp, and sounds like, and it looked like he played pretty well, I would say, at the preseason game. He's kind of that last guy out, really, just not quite there, and then just not much besides that. So, pretty much to review, they have some solid players. I love Tevin Jenkins. It's just, are you playing him in his non-natural position? And then James Daniels and Cody Whitehair are absolutely solid. But then it's a question of where are you playing all these guys and who are you starting? So, I mean, overall, I'd kind of rather have the flexibility here than a lack of depth. But I just think that at the same time, I don't know what to do with this offensive line. So, it's very interesting. Like I said, I like the players. It's just, where are you going to play everybody? And what's going to be the best combination for this team? I don't think it's great when teams go through many, many offensive line combinations. So I feel like they just need to figure out what works and stick with it. And we'll see what happens on the offensive line. Now let's talk about the defense. Akeem Hicks recently said he wants a contract extension, wants to retire a Bear. Bears just take care of that. He is an absolute stud. Maybe the second or third best defender, I would say, on this team right now. Roquan Smith will take him over if he already hasn't. And Eddie Jackson's another, potential second best. But Akeem Hicks can be a game wrecker at times, still at this point in his career. absolute stud and has just taken over, resurged his career here in Chicago for a number of years. Do you need to do anything you can to keep him around? Then it's, what else do we have here? Because Eddie Goldman is coming back from opting out, and I feel like should be the starting D tackle. If they're running this scheme with this 3-4. I think that the best combo to start would be to go Hicks, Bilal Nichols, and then put Eddie Goldman in the middle. But Bilal Nichols can play inside, and all of these players are inside, but maybe more defensive end versus defensive tackle in a 3-4. And I think that Bilal Nichols can kind of play both. And so I believe they played him at D tackle where Eddie Goldman would have been last year. And he played pretty well. But I think it would be best if they keep Goldman now, give him a chance at the D tackle, and have Nichols and Hicks on the field. But they also have Mario Edwards, who is, to me, a better rotation guy than anything else. I don't feel super great starting him. They also bring in Angelo Blackson just to be a depth piece on this team. Mike Pennell actually performed pretty well. It's interesting to see they bring him in as a veteran this year, performed pretty well. And then also Kiers Tonga, who is a rookie out of BYU, was listed higher on the depth chart than I thought he would be for a late round pick. So I originally had him on the practice squad and moved him up to the roster. So I think that he has actually potentially played himself into a spot in training camp, it seems like, because they have him listed pretty high. And Mike Pennell, as I said, played pretty well. So this is an interesting defensive line. It's filled with depth. Hicks is really your only sure thing. Otherwise, I feel like Goldman's solid coming off of the opt-out, and then Bilal Nichols. And otherwise, you just have a bunch of depth pieces. I don't have them keeping anybody else on that team. So this defensive line is okay. I mean, besides Akeem Hicks, it's honestly not great, but it's not bad. If Eddie Goldman can bounce back at all from the opt-out, he might be decent. He might be okay. So let's move on to the pass rushers, where I'm keeping 4. At one point, I had James Vaughters on the roster, but he just missed it now after some adjustments. Khalil Mack, absolute stud. Now, I will say I kind of, last year started thinking I had him lower, I feel like, than a lot of people when I was doing things like top 100. I just don't think he's performed quite up to maybe what he once was. Now, that's crazy to say because he is a top probably few pass rusher in the game still. You still might look to double team him very often. And the trade, in retrospect, I feel like will still always be worth it, giving it a chance. But he hasn't elevated this team by himself to maybe what they thought they could bring him to when they traded for him. So he's a solid number 1 pass rusher. He's the best defensive player of the year. It sounds like I'm maybe underrating him here. He is absolutely solid. He's one of the best defenders in football. But I feel like at the same time, he maybe has been overhyped a little bit. They also have Robert Quinn, who they brought in last year. I thought that was an interesting scheme fit. I saw him more as a 4-3 defensive end, but they, put him out at outside linebacker for a 3-4, and that, I think is okay. He still is decent at this point in his career. Then they have some depth pieces. Travis Gibson, who came out of Tulsa a few years ago, has not really been given opportunities. Feel like now he finally could be in the rotation. They actually, I think, have him and Jeremiah Atauchu at the same spot on the depth chart, so he could compete his way into a 3rd spot. So I think you're looking for him there, and then Atauchu is just a veteran player who can be a good depth piece. James Vaughters, I feel like if with a good preseason could potentially make his way on the roster. I feel like he's just still a little inconsistent right now. I've been keeping Ladarius Mack just kind of to keep his brother happy. I guess he's okay. Nowhere near what his brother is, but why not? Like, there was nobody else on the cut list that I felt more deserved it than Ladarius Mack, so he's kind of my last practice squad spot. And then they have a few other depth pieces, but this is a solid edge rush. I do think that Khalil Mack, solid. Robert Quinn, pretty good as a second pass rusher. Don't love the depth at this point, only having a small rotation of guys. But it'll work out fine. I mean, when you have Khalil Mack on your roster, you're pretty solid. The linebacker position, another one where I'm keeping minimal players here. I definitely another player you could replace Javon Wims with here is Joel Iyugbunue, who is he's just kind of been there for the past few years. He's currently listed above Alec Ogletree on the depth chart, who they recently brought in. But I thought Ogletree actually kind of performed well in the preseason game. And so I'm actually giving him a shot here. So they have Roquan Smith, who is developing into one of the best linebackers in football. We knew that coming out of the draft. He's just been an absolute hit. Can make some great tackles, almost like Miles Jack-ish type of player where he can go sideline to sideline, except, Roquan, I feel like, is more of a thumper, more dominant than Miles Jack ever is, but just kind of thinking of players that are similar. He's really developed into a star. And then they still have Danny Trevathan, who they brought in all the way back in like the John Fox days. That seems like forever ago when John Fox was coaching the Bears. That seems crazy, but wow, Danny Trevathan has been, I still almost think of him in a Broncos uniform, but he's been here for a long time. So they still have him, next to Roquan Smith. So really solid linebacker room. Christian Jones, they bring back, spent some time with the Lions over the past 2 years. I feel like he can be a good rotational piece now at this point in his career. As I mentioned, Alec Ogletree, a decent coverage player, I feel like can fight his way onto this roster. But otherwise, you could give it to Joel Iyugbunue. And I have them cutting Josh Woods, Austin Calitro, who I thought was an okay budget signing. But when you're given a linebacker number 60, that probably doesn't mean they're planning on keeping him on the team, honestly. But I love this linebacker room with who they have. Roquan Smith is an absolute stud. It's just, how many actually decent players do you have? I really don't think they have a whole ton, but what they have is good. So that's a pretty solid linebacker room. Now let's go to the corners, where we're getting some development finally. We also had a changing of the guard here. I still think the Bears are going to regret cutting Kyle Fuller. To me, was one of the worst moves of the offseason. I understand maybe if it saves you a bit of money, but to go from Kyle Fuller to Desmond Trufant is just not the move, in my opinion. I have still been a backer of Desmond Trufant for the past 2 years. Ever since he left the Falcons, I thought he was still going to be decent in Detroit. That was not really the case. I still think he's a startable player, but I believe this year even, Jalen Johnson proves himself to be a number one corner. So I just think that to go from that when you probably didn't have to, I mean, you maybe needed to, I guess, for salary cap, but I don't think you needed to. I would rather them kept Kyle Fuller. But Desmond Trufant, to me, will be just kind of a Band-Aid on that spot for now. He's just going to patch the hole until Jalen Johnson's ready to truly be a number one corner, because Jalen Johnson performed great last year as a rookie. And this year, I think, is a borderline huge breakout. They have Kendall Vilder pretty high on the depth chart right now. He's been okay. Just hasn't been given a lot of opportunities, and I feel like finally given the opportunity, he can perform well this year. And then they picked Thomas Graham Jr., one of my favorite picks as well in the draft. A huge steal there. He can play that slot position, I feel like, for this team, potentially right away, but if not, he can develop into that. So that's definitely worth keeping around. And then they still have R.D. Burns, who they chose to bring back. Solid depth piece, I guess, for this team. Then Duke Shelley performed actually pretty well in the preseason game. He could fight his way onto the roster. And then I'm putting Xavier Crawford and Trey Robertson on the cut list. And then also I'll talk about in the safeties. They have a few guys who I consider Tease Tabor and Michael Joseph closer to corners and safeties, but they have them on the depth chart listed as safeties, and on the roster they have them listed at DB. So if it just says DB, I'm going to go with what they have on the depth chart. So a solid, I would say, overall corner room, just with the upside. You could potentially, like, Trufant's not going to give you anything past this year, but you could potentially turn this into a Jalen Johnson, Kendall Vilder, Thomas Graham starting lineup, and I think that'd be pretty solid. So I think that's a pretty good corner room overall. Jumping to the safeties, Eddie Jackson, a few years ago, really, really good. Last year, regressed a little, I would say, just not quite of an elite year, but still a solid safety, good in coverage. He was known for the interceptions a few years ago, but I feel like he can get back there. I'm still confident in Eddie Jackson. They also have Deshaun Gibson, who kind of had a career resurgence here last year. He actually performed pretty well, and I feel like is a startable safety. They also have Deion Bush, though, who's a hard hitter who they could also potentially use. DeAndre Houston Carson as well has just been a depth piece on this team for a long time. So, that's a good rotation overall. I feel great with Jackson and Gibson. Another thing, I remember when Deshaun Gibson, I think it was 2014, was unbelievable for the Browns, and he's been on 3 teams since. But this team has a few guys that at one point they were really, really good. So I feel good in that safety starting combo. I'm choosing to keep Jordan Lucas here on the practice squad. Opted out of last season, so he's one of my unlimited experience players right now that I have on here, but he could potentially be a cut. They have him listed very low on the depth chart, so he could potentially be on the way out. I'm giving him a shot, but he would be one that maybe you could replace on the practice squad. And as I mentioned, so they have Marquis Kirsten, who I think is just a cut, but then they have Tease Tabor and Michael Joseph listed at safety in the depth chart. I just don't think they stick around. If so, I feel like they're closer to corners. But this is a solid safety room, specifically your starters, and then I feel okay with everything behind that. Moving to the special teams, Cairo Santos, decent kicker. Probably better than Cody Parkey. So he was decent for them last year. Pat O'Donnell is a pretty underrated player for the Bears here. He's been there since 2014, I think. Just solid, been here for a while. Same with Patrick Scales, been here for a long time. I have them cutting Brian Johnson, who's there also competing for a kicking spot. So, now, let's take a look at the schedule. So, as I mentioned earlier for Andy Dalton, it may not be a good start for him because, 2 of the first 3 weeks, you're playing the Rams and the Browns. So speaking of kind of looking at the schedule now, the L's and the 50s, if you are new to this series, I give automatic L's and automatic W's. We are so close to automatic W's. We're getting close. We haven't seen any green marks, on the screen, but we're getting there. But basically what the 50s mean is I'm saying they win one of those 2 games. These could be games against the same team, 2 teams that are ranked closely, 2 away games, 2 home games, something like that. So, they're color-coded as well. So basically that goes with the other game. That's the same color. So for example, the Bengals and the Raiders, who I've already revealed in this series, they're the same color because I'm saying they'll win one of those 2 games. Just because I feel like to keep the records pretty even and to keep just overall the consistency, I think it's a better way to do it because then things can change as well with so many. And then there's so many unpredicted, games. But they start, they could win 3 to 5 games. I say they win 2. Like I said, Andy Dalton, I feel like will be given the opportunity to start, and he's going to be playing against some tough teams. It's not going to be great for him, and I feel like they need to go to Justin Fields anyways pretty early on. Then, you might start to bounce back, but then you get the Packers and the Bucks. Huge bad stretch there. And the Niners and the Steelers are also tough. They're potentially playoff teams. So that is just a tough stretch. And that's really what it comes down to the Bears. When I put this schedule through, I was thinking, as I was typing it out, this is not good. This team has such a bad schedule. And I feel like they're going to underperform record-wise what their roster is. I think this team is closer to 7 or 8 wins than it is 5 or 6, but I just don't see it with the schedule. Nice bye week time, I guess, just in the middle. But then they have 3 of the 4 weeks to be the Ravens, the Cardinals, and the Packers. This is just tough. Oh, man. I just feel bad. But then they close it out. Solid few games, twice against the Vikings. They could potentially take some wins there. I feel bad about the schedule. This is I'm rooting for this team. Even like I think Justin Fields. I'm rooting for Justin Fields. Just this schedule is so tough. I'm shocked it's so tough. So I have them going 5-12, and I put that out, and I was thinking, is that right? I mean, I thought we made it past the 5 hump. I thought we made it to the 6-win teams, but not apparently if you have the Chicago Bears schedule. Just bad luck. I feel like whatever place they finished last year, I think it was second actually, because they made the playoffs. All the other second place teams now might be division winning teams. I mean, this is crazy. So then let's talk about the awards. I'm going to give out some awards for the top players. I think Allen Robinson wins Offensive Player of the Year, hoping they can get a contract done for them, because otherwise Allen Robinson's going to go to a team that needs a contender, and he can go out and get some money and potentially make some big plays for a contender. So they need to keep him around if possible. I'm going with Khalil Mack for Defensive Player of the Year, just a dominant player. My breakout player of the year is Darnell Mooney. I think he steps into that wide receiver 2 role and just absolutely goes crazy with that. I think his deep speed is unbelievable. And his quarterback, Justin Fields, I have as the Rookie of the Year. I don't know how many games he will start, but whatever it is, he's going to prove to be the future. So, thank you so much for watching this episode. I appreciate you for staying this late in the video. Sorry it has been a bit since there was a delay between the Giants and the Panthers. I just have been working on a lot of stuff recently. This week, I'm going to try to get some videos out. But if you are a longtime viewer, you know about grocery games, and we did the obstacle course last year. I actually recorded that this weekend. So that's what last week was, a lot of prep. And so I do think it will end up being worth it to get a higher quality video of that. I just needed a lot of prep time. But now I'm going to hopefully get a streak of these videos going. We're getting there to football season. As said before, preseason's already starting. So that will actually give me more intel and more cuts. Will make it easier kind of to see who's actually going to make this team. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.